getting ready to paint our 1966 Charger. Super excited because A, it's a Hemi car, B, I haven't done one yet, and it's a new color, and it's a challenging color with that being said. So there's a lot that goes into the preparation and execution of this car.
See, I've seen this movie before. This is where Will comes in at the last minute, takes full credit for this car's resurrection back to life because he painted it, right? It ain't just about the paint. The paint's the easy part. You walk in and you gun it for a couple of hours. It's all the work that it took to get it where it's at.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Buried deep in the Pacific Northwest, one team in Springfield, Oregon, takes on the impossible, finding dead Mopar muscle and bringing it back from the grave. Award-winning Master of Mopar, Mark Worman, his cousin Doug, his daughter Alyssa, his best friend Royal, his painter Will, and the rest of the GYC ghouls are restoring, resurrecting, and recreating some of the fastest, fiercest, and rarest muscle cars on the planet. This is Graveyard Cars.
If you remember this car, it was one of the first ones that Michael had worked on, and he did it without gloves on. It started to rust. We called them meat sweats. We picked on him a lot because his palms are super sweaty. So
Handprints.
We're going to peel this back. You don't need to peel back.
Always a telltale sign of somebody that likes meat.
So unfortunately, we had to strip a good portion of this car back, redo some things to get it to where it's at now. So with all that being said, here we are getting ready to finally paint this.
I am really excited to see our 66 Charger moving forward to paint right now because it's been with us a long time, too long, in fact. I bought it for a different client up in Canada and then resold it to another client that we're doing cars for now. The 66 Charger is so unique. If you really just take your time and look at those cars, look at the design, the electroluminescent dash. I mean, what a neat thing. It just glows at night. I wish I had one I could share with you, but we don't have one that's done. The one for the dash isn't done for this car. But in the world of rare, this particular car, being a 426 Hemi and a 4-speed in ZZ1, which is a beautiful color, could very possibly be like one of one that's ever built. We all see 66, 67 first-generation Chargers at the car shows, but how many do you see that are real live Hemi cars, real live 4-speed cars in good colors with the original engine? Very, very rarely do you ever see that. So when I talk about checking out a car's uniqueness, a great example of this, because we've been on for so long doing this, is a few years ago, Sandwich Man, he has his regular name, Tony D'Agostino, yeah, Dagwood, I call him, from the Dagwood sandwiches. Tony was out, we looked at a 1966 Hemi Charger. This was interesting. I was told that the car was one of the 8 or 9 original, maybe a few more than that, NASCAR program cars. It had this really cool air cleaner on it that was cold air induction like NASCAR would have used. It had the spoiler like the NASCARs would have used. So when I called Tony and told him about it, of course, Tony's a very negative human being. His job is to drop a deuce, a Cleveland steamer, right in the middle of whatever it is that you're doing. So when I say, hey, you gotta check out this NASCAR. There ain't no NASCAR, I'll be out in the next flight. Next thing you know, he comes waddling in, and we do a complete inspection of this car. And really, we should just take a second and share some of that because it's fascinating stuff.
The only NASCAR program cars I'm aware of are the Daytonas and Superbirds. Mm-hmm. I never say never. But
you don't say never with Mopar.
I'm not, but I don't have a lot of confidence in it.
Okay.
This right next to us.
The spoiler, that's NASCAR only, right? That is definitely a NASCAR-inspired spoiler.
Right, that's definitely NASCAR-inspired, and believe it or not, these came with a handful of these first-generation Hemi Chargers only. It wasn't installed on the assembly line. It was installed at the dealership. It came with the car, but not installed on the assembly line.
But it came in the trunk of the car?
Yes.
Like the headers on the D-Barracudas and stuff?
Right, like the D-Barracudas, the headers were with the car.
See, I didn't know that. Again, you're a little sharper on this older stuff. My opinion, the car left Chrysler as a factory NASCAR program car. I will find out. Granted, the jury's still out. There's no absolute 100%. There's no 2,000%. But when there is, you'll be the
5%. There's no percent.
Okay, your eyes just keep getting bigger, so I don't know what that is.
This car is a super challenging car to paint because it's a very light metallic, meaning the preparation of this car needs to be perfect, finished off great so you have no sand scratches. Second problem with this, it's a super transparent color. You put layer after layer after layer, you run that chance of the color modeling. It'll look like a zebra. The metallic won't lay out right, so every coat that you lay down, that metallic has to just be 100% perfect. And you're talking like 13 coats of color, and I did this car with the hood on it. So it's a huge car, 13 coats, probably one of the most difficult cars that we've had to spray to date. So with this color, because it's a new color especially, I always start with a spray out card because that tells me how many coats it's going to take to cover. And it's also going to show me how that metallic lays out. So if it starts to model, you'll see if your gun's not perfectly at a 90-degree angle, if you put it on too heavy or too light, that metallic doesn't lay down. It kind of groups together and gives you like a zebra effect. Now on the Plum Crazy cars or the Hemi Orange, those colors are so dark, you really can't see it. But on a super light color, a B5 blue does it also. But on the lighter colors that have heavy metallic, it'll show it plain as day. So before I even start my color, I do 2 coats of sealer. And here are the reasons why. First one is just to ensure that all my 600 grit scratches are filled with that second coat of sealer. Secondly, the car has some of the pre-paint on it, has some primer on it, so I like to seal it and get it all one consistent color, and that way it makes it a lot easier.
Being I like to share the whole story, not just take the credit for when something comes out beautiful like Will does, I'll tell you this car had problems. It was overall a good, solid-bodied car. It was actually original paint when I got it. It did need sections of the floor and the trunk floor replaced. Both quarters at the front and the back of the wheel openings were destroyed from rust. We happened to get, if you go back to another episode, when I made Alyssa's cut Stan's hair so I could have that 66 Charger for $100, that 66 Charger donated the quarter panels for this Hemi car. So the little donor car also contributed some other stuff, some trim, ornamentation, the right door, the right fender, and the hood, because ours were a little bit rusty. So never say that a car's garbage and shouldn't have some value to it, because this little car, even though I just paid $100 for it, and Alyssa had to cut his hair, really saved the day on this car. My body man at the time was Ryan. He cut both quarter panels off at the spot welded union where it meets the inner structure of the quarter and put them on as complete skins. You cannot buy these. They are not reproduced, so you have to have good original used ones. So we drilled them off the donor car, sent it over, had them dipped, brought it back and replaced them. We did have some small sections on the wheelhouses that had to be done too, but overall that is a really good, solid metal car.
You know, Mark loves, and everybody at home, you guys all know this, he loves to take the credit for everything. But what it comes down to is when these cars are done, people see them at shows, they know that I'm the one that painted it. You know, when you think of the Sistine Chapel and who built it, no, you think of, hey, Michelangelo painted it. So I kind of run that same reference, me, Michelangelo. I mean, I'm not saying that skill set's there like that, but you get the point.
So in our 1968 Dodge Charger RT out of Texas, the last time we saw this car, I was pointing out what we're going to have to do to be able to save it. We talked about the donor pieces. At that time, everything was sent out to be dipped, and we just got all that stuff back. So now we're ready to begin the final metal assembly of our 68RT. So with the Charger back, really there were no surprises in it. Overall, you could see the problems before we ever got started on it, and they were every bit as evident once it came back. So everything we had thought that we were going to replace, we are ending up replacing. I just wanted to catch you up on what we've done so far, where the car's at. The right rear frame rail is being replaced, so it is in position now. He's got it welded at the under seat pan area, but loose at the back. That's because we were waiting for some rear body panel parts to show up, such as the rear valance and the rear body panel itself, before we can weld in this section. This frame rail is really good. So all we had to do is put POR 15, which is a metal treatment, inside of the frame rail. The outside, you can see, is good solid stuff. So we're gonna be good there. The outer rail, which is the spring perch, because of this rust right through here, and the fact that we're replacing the rear body panel, we are gonna replace that as well. So that'll put new right rail, right spring hanger, left spring hanger, but original frame rail. Now in the middle, we've already done the main floor. If you look inside here, you'll see that this section from the firewall back here to the step well has already been replaced. This is our new AMD floor. Look how they've duplicated all of the original welds. Now originally it was spot welded in most areas, but our car aligner won't get in there all the way and get all of those spot welds, so we have to do some plug welding. But these are all basically on the same exact center that the factory welded them up. So that's why when you look at that from the top down, it just looks sanitary. In a perfect world, I'll tell you, I would love to get a Marty McFly time machine, go back to when the manufacturer was done with their equipment and have bought it all, like their welders and their jigs for lowering the cars and raising the engines. Now, we have really good equipment. We have our car aligner, spot welder, we have our Miller MIG welders, we have all that good equipment, but it's not specifically for working on a 1970 Challenger or a 68 Charger. So what we have to do is a combination of both. We use our spot welder when we have access to it. We have a 3-foot long extension, so we can go in quite a ways and do spot welding. So when you watch him putting that panel in, you'll see a combination of spot welding and MIG welding. Ultimately, the best part of that is we can make a MIG weld look like a spot weld. That's good, that makes it look correct. But also the structural integrity of the body is duplicated or better and more accurate than they even did on the assembly line. This step well will be replaced, but we haven't put it in yet, just for the simple fact that we're not done with this rail yet, and it intersects with that rail. At the front, we end up replacing the left rail. So the left frame rail, all the way back to the transmission crossmember or torsion bar crossmember, has been replaced, as well as the shock tower and the apron itself. You know, years ago when I first started doing restoration, we didn't have a spot welder. They were out, but we certainly couldn't afford one. And so we did everything with MIG and did the best that we could. For me, it's fascinating to watch the bodymen who really become close with the equipment and know what to expect from it, to watch those guys master their way through things. Like you watch him going along with the spot welder, it's beautiful welds. You can see the smoke coming off of it. You know that you have penetration between both metals, which means you have your integrity, the weld integrity as well as the structural integrity of the car. Watch him do the MIG welding, the exact same thing. You know you have good penetration. You know that we have done as much or more than the factory. So while it is kind of unfortunate that we don't have all of the original equipment to work on these, what we have today would be slower, but perhaps even a better job. On this side, you can see we're really good still. This was good, solid metal. We're going to be able to save all of this, as well as the firewall. Usually there's a lot of rot in these firewalls, and that one is really nice. Once we get the rest of the pieces for the rear body, we will build it out and get to that intricate part, which is that back glass opening that we talked about that was so rotted out. But right now they're moving along great on it. We'll check back in once they are at the point of putting the back half of the car together. Meeting adjourned. Oh, you guys wondering about that? Tango and Cash, Cash and Tango. Sylvester Stallone, Kurt Russell.
So Mark, you guys will notice he's getting older. So these movies that he talks about, you know, they're 30 years old and they weren't very good then.
What does he say when he shoots it? Anybody want to get high? I hated that movie. I love the movie because it was a buddy cop movie, and I love all buddy cop movies, but I never understood all the constant tongue-in-cheek, miserable humor. Remember when he dropped the soap in the shower, and he bent down to get it, and Tango thought he was...
And then he tries to relive it, here we go, 30 years later, and it's still not a good movie. And then at this point, he's just embarrassing himself, and he tries to just write it out for the sake of camera, because he forgets he's actually on TV. So that's how ridiculous and over the top he can be at times. So in this car, everyone does their thing differently. Just for me, I set the booth at 70 degrees. I use an 885 reducer. That dries at 85 degrees, otherwise it takes a little bit longer. When you have that many coats, you want to give it time for that metallic to move. No rush, take your time, put a coat on, just chill. Go back in there, do it again. So I usually keep the booth 15 degrees different than the reducer that I'm using. I use my new SATA, it's a 5500 gun with the 1/4 tip. It atomizes great, it lays the product down perfectly, and I actually use my clear gun for color on this one. There's certain guns you want to use for certain things, and when it came to this one, I wanted a 1/4 tip, and I just went ahead and colored and clear with that gun.
Now, when you're watching him install the trunk floor, the trunk floor extensions, you'll notice that there's a symmetry to the welds. They are about 2 inches on center from each other, which the manufacturer was about 4 inches on center. But it was also a lot of brand new metal back then, and they had a lot, probably more powerful equipment. So I say, weld the hell out of it. Get it solid. I haven't seen anybody pull up a trunk and say, there's too many spot welds there, you lose. Nobody cares about that. What they do care about is driving down the road and knowing that the car's solid, raising it up on a lift and not seeing it open up. So the door gaps open up when you do it like a convertible would because maybe it's not that solid. So you see every 2 inches is a spot weld for as long as we can do spot welding, then it becomes MIG welding.
I'm not a metal guy. I've been around it obviously my whole life, but it's always cool to watch them, learn from them. So when it comes like the spot welding, they're not actually filling it with weld, they're just taking the metal and basically kind of fusing it together. So it's always cool to kind of watch them do stuff and pick up tips and what you should do to make it better.
Josh did a great job on the trunk floor. It looks absolutely fabulous. And again, I mentioned the structural part of it. That's so important. The rear portion of the unibody on this car is just as valuable from the integrity standpoint as the front inner structure. If you go back and look at some of the cars that we put front clips on, we're very careful about putting on the frame rails and marrying them into the torsion bar crossmember and the rockers and the firewall. The same thing applies back here. And when you're talking about a unibody, that kind of work is very important. Knowing that you have good penetration with your welds, knowing that you have plenty of welds, that's all important because the integrity of a unibody is made up piece by piece. So for example, and I've talked about this before, a full frame vehicle that has a body setting down over it like Christine, that body doesn't really go through anything. It's more of a cosmetic shell. It doesn't have to hold up to anything. You get into a unibody, it has no frame. So the frame rail, when it marries to the floor, the trunk floor, and intersects with the wheelhouse, and it gets reinforced to the Dutchman panel, and the rear body panel, the crossmember, the tail light panel, and the inner and outer wheelhouses, all together collectively, it becomes an indestructible piece. Now with that trunk floor in and welded into place, we have our integrity back there. That means we can cut the rest of the pieces loose so we can fix that back window opening. In this particular case, the part that we're putting on, the used donor part, is pretty intricate. It is not only the package tray as one unit with that surround area for the back window and the roof reinforcement, but we also brought the side header of the roof all the way up to the A-pillar, just because it was a factory piece, it was solid, and it helped us establish the geometry. That's very important. If you got factory geometry, put that piece in as one. It takes a lot longer to cut and trim, but when you do, you've got a factory-looking car sitting there. When it came off of the donor car, it had spot welds that held it to the wheelhouse and to the brackets that went up to the Dutchman panel. Spot welds that held it to the roof interstructure on the left side. The right-hand side where it intersected with all those parts. Each and every one had to be dissected apart. So there's a lot of thinking and a lot of measuring, and then once you do have it off, you saw us lift that great big piece off, he spent another week grinding and cutting and trimming the excess garbage off of it so that they could bring it in and set it down as one unit.
Okay, so this is very interesting to me. You know, normally I focus on mechanics. That's what I do. I've done this all my life. Mark and I got started really young, probably 8 or 10 years old. Started working on lawnmowers, mini bikes, go-karts, motorcycles, and we've worked our way all the way up to these cars. So the rear window opening has 12 points of intersection, and all of these have to line up perfectly before you can install the new window. When these guys are working on these cars, it's just fascinating to me what great work these guys do.
Now, the last time we used a used roof section because it's not being made was on our 1971 Cuda. That was the Hemi Cuda we pretty much, George and I, built from scratch. All of the same principles that we shared with you then, and I wish we could go back and play it again because there was a lot of really good stuff, is used in this particular car right now. It's making sure that geometrically the car is square, that everything is in space where it's supposed to be before you start spot welding things together. The A pillar, the B pillars, the cowl, the upper cowl, the floors, the frame rails, all of that we did on that black car are the same principles we're using in this smaller roof section. This is the best part. When they have that piece in place, that car begins to come to life. You can now see with the header, the rear header, the side header, and all the pieces, you can see that back window opening. Now, all of a sudden, we've got a 68 Charger.
I use the DCU 2002. It's a great clear, it's thick, it really doesn't move much. It's got a great shine, cut and buffs phenomenally. I do 3 coats, some people do 4, but on that you can do 3 coats, still cut and buff and have plenty of material left.
When we left off, Josh was just working on putting the rear roof section in. Remember, they don't make a lot of those pieces new, so we had to use a donor car. Now the hard part, now the real hard part, and that is making sure that the quarter panels are where they belong in space. So when you look at this car, everything is on it right now. The hood, the fenders, the doors, the quarters are mocked up and ready to weld into place, but there's a reason for that. Now with those quarter panels set where they're supposed to be, there's still a lot of potential movement in them. If you put a quarter panel on and you don't put the door on and the fender on and the hood on like we've done here, it is so easy to get that quarter in the wrong spot. If you get it in the wrong spot, you're either gonna cut it apart and re-weld it, or you're gonna make lines out of mud that you shouldn't have to make, or you're gonna pie cut corners and make openings fit that you shouldn't have to. If he were to weld the front of the door jamb open against the door pillar reinforcement, that quarter panel could shoot up in the air or go down. It could move all over the place. What we want to do is get a couple of establishing welds to hold it where we believe it needs to go to the wheelhouse where it meets the quarter, put one at the bottom, one in the middle, one at the back, and it just holds everything in place so then he can continue to shape the metal as he spot welds it together. So now, when we look, we have a great hood gap. The fender to hood gap is perfect. It's where it should be. Same thing on this side. The fender to the hood gap is a perfect line, front to back. You know, and again, when it comes to the front, same thing. The front of the hood matches the front of the fenders. And I'll show you why that is so important. Because when we get down here to the cowl, this area right here, we cannot move this cowl. This is solid. This is the firewall. We can't do anything with it. So these fenders have to fit that. The hood has to fit the cowl. But the doors have to fit the fenders. So here, when you look, you see we've already taken the time to have a really nice line. This door now has a great alignment with this fender, and up here, if you look, with the upper cowl. Now the door is setting in space on this car where it has to set, because the door has a lot of movement. It could go down, it could go up, it could go back, it could go forward, it could tip like this. All the panels can do that. That articulation in all the panels is there. So before you weld the quarters, which I'm going to show you in a second, are lined up perfectly with the doors, these have to be set. Anybody who tells you they're not, or anybody who does it in their garage and just welds the quarters on and then puts doors on to find out that they don't fit, well, they deserve what they got, because it can't be done that way.
So when it comes to SEMA, everybody's super critical. You have to be super critical on yourself because you have the world. It's the biggest car show in the world. Indoors, great lighting, they're all over it. And there's been a mistake here, mistake there. 99% of the time, nobody even sees it. But we have had previous people, I won't use names, we'll just call him the victim, that couldn't wait. You'd build a car, you'd spend 100 hours on it, make it beautiful, and there could be a little dot on the underside that you have to use a magnifying glass to see. You go to a show and be like, yeah, you know, it's a great car, but man, if you get a 90-degree angle with a flashlight and a magnifying glass, there's a little dot there.
Where's the shifter boot, or what's the deal?
Didn't restore the car, Darren. Didn't restore the car.
So as usual, you never quite finish them, even when they go.
No, I didn't
Darren,
get
that's how
paid
the
to do a
car came out.
restoration. It's a collision job.
I understand that.
It used to just infuriate me. That's a horrible question, Pete. You brought my blood pressure up. I hope that was the last one.
You look here at the back of the door where it meets the quarter. Very crucial area. Look at that gap. All the way down, all the way across the bottom. What you've got to be mindful of is this style line. So not only is this quarter panel now setting in space where it has to before we begin welding, but the style lines are all lining up as well. The top of the quarter to the door, the bottom style line. And sometimes these quarter panels, more often than not, the style lines are off a little bit. That's fine, that's why God made filler. There's only so much you can do with it. When I'm talking about those style lines, we're doing the best that we can. So we have got a new reproduction quarter panel, let's say. We get it from Autometal Direct. It's a great panel. It looks very much like the original one. It's the same gauge metal, same type of steel. Those are all good things. But it isn't a factory panel. And over time, when they make these panels, maybe it started off a perfect duplicate, but by the time they've stamped 50,000 of them out, it's not so perfect. And what I'm getting at is the style lines. We have very rarely ever had where the middle door style line, the lower style line, and the hip line up at the top where it rolls over into the top of the quarter all match perfectly to a factory door. Oftentimes, we do the best, we split the difference, make sure you have your door gap and the top of your door set and the opening at the bottom of the rocker set. Once all those are done, you can just build the rest of it out of mud if you need to. At this point, it is literally ready for the weld on from the front standpoint. I'll show you the back standpoint. So the same thing applies on the back of the car. There's a lot of things to consider when you're aligning the sheet metal. Now, one thing you don't see on here is the trunk lid. He has already fit the trunk lid, and he believes right now that the quarters and the rear body panel and the drain troughs are in space where they belong. But if the body man were to start welding at the front of the quarter and weld it solid, and then come back and weld the wheelhouse solid, and then start welding in the rear body panel solid, all of your movements, all of your chances of doing anything go away. And metal moves. Everybody knows that metal moves when you weld it. This thing could move quite a bit. I built unique racks, we call them frame jigs, that have predetermined locations in them for all of the holes, the alignment holes in the frame rails of these unibodies. So we can't get it wrong. We can't get, as far as the structural part of it, as far as the frame rails, X, Y, and Z, length, width, and height. They're all established. Once you have that frame rail down and into place, you still have a rear body panel and a quarter panel and wheelhouses that have nothing to do with the frame jig. How high you set them, how low you set them, side to side. Those are all the areas that you have to be so crucial with all your measurements. Go out and measure an original car. Those corners for the rear valance extensions, those are miserable from the factory. Look at half a dozen cars, they fit terrible. They're up like this, those are factory. We take our time and try to make them fit better. Same thing for the rear valance, same thing for how those quarter panels go on. All of that has nothing to do with the frame jig. That's up to the technician installing them. So what he wants to do is start up here at the front, at this door opening right here, and do a couple of welds to hold it in place. All the provisions have been made, the plug welds are made. Tack it into place. He wants to hold it rigid. 1 or 2 spot welds here in the wheelhouse. That way the quarter really can't move too much. Nobody can walk by and bump it, even though it's got screws in it. They're still susceptible to movement. Then he'll go to the right-hand side, do the same thing. He will weld up 2 spots in the door jamb opening, a couple at the wheelhouse. At that point, he's gonna refit the trunk lid. Make sure that the deck lid, side to side and front to back, along with the Dutchman panel, are all in perfect alignment. So with that, I'm gonna cut him loose to go ahead and do his tack in place welds at the quarters and at the wheelhouses. He'll fit everything. I'll come out and do a final sign off on the Dutchman to the deck lid alignment, and then he can just weld this car solid. All right, so on our little 68 Charger, he has everything fit the way that it's supposed to. The Dutchman panel, if you look at the gap between the trunk, this is better than they are from the factory, by the way, much better. Very even gap from side to side, but if you stand up high and you look down on it, you may see that there's a little taper here in this corner and that corner. That's not because of our fitment, it's because of the replacement Dutchman panel. Needs a little bit of metal work when we're all done before we send this car over to mud. The deck lid, the gaps from the deck lid to the quarter, especially around this crucial sail panel area, so important to get right. A lot of metal work in there, done. Quarter extensions line up perfectly with the deck lid, perfectly. So when you look at this thing as a whole, we have the rear valance on it, the valance corners, which never just fall into place. Anybody who's done those knows absolutely those things are a pain. He has fit them to perfection. So we are literally at the point now where I'm gonna cut him loose to go ahead and weld everything up solid, grind it down, treat it, make sure it's all ready to move to the next stage. Then the last thing he'll put on is our roof skin. Which one's my spike camera? Which one's my love-making camera? Jeffrey. It's me, it's Mark. Warman, ice tray, ice man, ice pick, ice shavings, ice baby, vanilla ice, ice hole.
And here we go again. Mark does a beautiful job explaining the process, what we're doing, all the metal work. Love it. And he goes into this ice tray and ice cubes and ice machine and ice water. What does it mean? Ice tray? I'm over the ice tray thing. Just Mark's a great name. Mark Gregory Warman. That actually sounds like a good name. Should stick with it.
Over the years, I've noticed that the metal work is somewhat like mechanical work in that there's a protocol and a flow in order to make these things go together. I've learned over the years that a system like ours is in place because we've learned from the school of hard knocks. I know I sure have.
The taillight panel on any car that's a unibody is the heart of where that back end of that car goes. It has to be exactly centered. So when you watch it and you see us just spot welding away and it looks like it's easy and everything's going together, there was hour after hour of concentration on making sure of pre-fitting the quarter panels, pre-fitting the Dutchman panel, taking them all back off again, putting that thing right where it belongs, then put everything back on again. Make sure that you have your trunk gap to Dutchman panel and your quarter gaps to your door gaps, then take it all back off because you have to have access to it to do that spot welding. And that, I believe, is really what sets our restoration shop apart from so many that are out there.
Once the paintwork's all done, give it a week, give it a nice cut and buff. It's great because I have Noah that just jumps right on them. We start with a stick at 800, 1200, 1500, 2000, 3000. That way it makes the buffing process a little bit quicker. We start with the block because it just makes it a little bit flatter. 3M has a great setup, and it's very simple. They have their compounds 1, 2, and 3. Their pads are the same color as the compound. So he just steps it through 1, 2, and 3. So after the buffing's done, you look at it, the car looks like a sheet of glass. Whether I did it or Noah has done it, it's awesome. Take it outside and give it a thorough wash. All the compound, all the dirt, get it nice and clean, roll it back into the booth, mask the whole car up, and do about 2 good coats of undercoating. I don't like to do too much because I don't want to bury work, because when you get too much, people think, what are they hiding? So I don't do it quite like factory. 2 coats where it still does its job. People will look underneath there and say, wow, look at the nice welds, look at the gaps, look how the floor pans are laying. It's not all beat to crap. Get that completely done. And then at that point, I'll try to get it right over to assembly, but we like to let it sit like a week over there and fully air out. It's a very smelly product. Then at that point, we can take it off the whirly jig, put it on the bin pack, and it's ready for assembly. And once it goes over to assembly, that's another car that's out of our department, which is a huge help, and that's that much closer to getting back to the customer.
All right, so Josh has done an amazing job on our 1968 Dodge Charger. The last time I talked to you, he was getting ready to weld up the quarter panels, the rear body panel, rear valance. You have that done?
Oh, yeah.
Did a good job?
Did a great job.
It looks excellent. Excellent. We're ready to put a roof skin on. A couple things. One, he called me out here yesterday to look at the roof skin. He had it fit into position. Everything was fit the way it was supposed to be. Looked really good. You feel comfortable about it?
Real comfortable about it.
He made set holes, basically, so when we put this skin back on, they'll go right back into the original holes that we had. Is that true?
Yep.
Good. He's a little nervous right now, so we just having a little fun with him. I like messing with people.
One of my favorite things here at Graveyard Cars, in all seriousness, I love it when new guys are on TV. Michael, Noah, they're brilliant. They just freeze. They don't know how to do anything. Me, on the other hand, go back to our original pilot that was on the History Channel. Mark was insulting me. I was firing right back, like the cameras aren't even there. I've just been natural at being in front of the camera.
Mark said you were a scared little when you first got on camera.
That is incorrect. Go back, check the footage.
Show the tape, please. I took him to the hole. That's what they call it in basketball, right? I took him to the rack. That guy didn't have a prayer. Matching widths with me, but he's unarmed. You know what I'm saying? Roll the tape. Nice toes, by the way. Congratulations. God, those are great. Bizarrely egg-shaped head and your receding hairline and your itsy-bitsy little ears. Point being, could you maybe perhaps next time just get a little bit less dirt in it? Hey, now here's another thought, too. Did you actually spray this in the booth, or did you go outside and spray it?
I did it at the beach.
So I just want to make sure this is all my fault. These not being painted, my fault, because I didn't say Simon Says. That one dirty because it's factory dirt.
Yes.
That, setting it in the paint booth without a note.
I had no note.
Nice toes.
Nice ears.
Nice toes.
Nose.
What are those things?
Look at that.
They're like there's like 5 Twinkies on the end of each foot.
That's
with
why I
some
wear
kind of
socks
little
in.
thing. Well, you should wear something more than flip-flops. You're a
God,
painter.
you're fat.
Oh, look at you.
Look at
you.
me.
Yeah, big stretch mark. Great big 300-pound stretch mark. He was 200 pounds a year ago. I took everybody down. I took Josh down. I took Chips down. I took everybody down. I took Alyssa down.
But you're always bragging about Royal running me in Josh County.
Because Royal does more in an hour than you guys do in a day. Can't get in the ring with me. I'm Mike Tyson of Vander Holyfield. I'll eat your ear. You know what I'm saying? You see what I mean? I'll hit you upside your head. I'll go into your cranium. That's Mike Tyson. Don't show him that, because I don't need him out here beating the out of me. You know, I will say this. You go back to that old tape, it's about 12 years ago. Will looked a whole lot better, a lot more human. Didn't he? Didn't he look nice? I mean, I was fat and I had issues, things going on. I had problems. I was trying to build a TV show, okay? But Will, he looked pretty darn decent there. Pretty darn decent. Alyssa looked like she was 2 years old. Looked like her baby. I think that's the casting tape that I got in trouble for saying something to my wife about the way she looked.
So back in the day, factory would seam seal the crossbows to the roof. That prevents it from kind of oil canning, being super flimsy. Over the years, we kind of find ways what works great, what doesn't. We found a great urethane seam sealer. It adheres phenomenally. So we put that in between those crossbows and the roof skin, hold it down nice and tight, so that way when it goes out to the mudroom for the body work, it's not jumping all over the place. They have a nice solid skin to do their body work to.
Okay, looking good, buddy. Let's hop down and grab us a roof skin. Do the do. We can talk about the structural integrity. We can talk about all the panels. All that stuff's important, but really when you see a roof skin going on a car that had no roof skin, that had no back window opening, that had no quarter panels, that had no roof floors, that had no rails, this is really the most rewarding part for me. This is the part that makes graveyard cars fun for me, and it's what makes that 68 Charger come to life. For those of you who are sitting at home admiring this job, pay close attention when they pull wide on that car. The symmetry of the spot welds and the cuts on the right and the left side. It looks like you put a mirror right down the middle. That is what takes skill, and that is what takes years to dial in.
So like all these cars that have any bare metal, whether they just come back from the dipper or if it's little breakthroughs before a paint job, I always spray a little DP90 on them because sealer paint won't stick to bare metal. The DP90 bites to that bare metal, and then the sealer will stick to the DP90, which ensures a long paint job that'll last forever. Back in the day, and it's great, Tony has great illustration of what these cars went through, the process once the metal work was done. They went into like this conveyor belt that took them right down, dipped them half the way up, not the whole car, only half the way up, and then it went on to the assembly side. So half the car was already sealed. Why they didn't do the whole one, it's above my pay grade, but Tony's got great illustration on the process of these cars. So when it came to this Charger in particular, we're not doing body work, paint, the whole process. We're literally just getting the metal work done. So the metal guys have it, and that's a lot of pressure on them because those gaps, the functionality of the car needs to be perfect because you can't hide anything. So once they're done with it, we take it, sand the whole car down, get it all cleaned up, and then re-DP90 all the bare metal. So that way they're getting a nice, sanitary, clean car that's ready for them to take over on the next steps. When these cars come back from the dipper, it is great because they're spotless. The downfall is there's so many nooks and crannies that you have to get. You know, we have those wands that go inside all the frame rails, everything that you can't reach, because inside the frame rails, bare metal now too, and you got to treat that. So we put like a cavity wax through all the seals. Otherwise, it's just down the road, it's gonna get washed, and it'll start dripping rust out of small areas.
The second generation Charger, 68 to 70, is without a doubt one of the most collectible cars in the world today. It was one of the sexiest cars in the world when it came out. It isn't just the sleek design of it, it's everything. But maybe the single most talked about feature on the 68 to 70 Charger is the roofline. That fast top. Dodge calls it a fast top. Very race car inspired design. The flip top gas cap, the NASCAR style gas cap that sets on the top of the quarter panel. All of these things are what make that car so desirable and so sexy even 50 years later.